The avalanche didn't roar, it sighed, like the mountain had grown tired of holding itself up. When it came, it took my wagon, my paints, and the map I'd trusted more than prayer. Stay, because my silence breaks in the last minute. The world went white, then wait. I remembered the sudden hush under snow, a hush so complete it felt like drowning in cotton. I clawed, but the drift packed tight as stone. My breath fogged inside my scarf until I couldn't tell if I was breathing or dreaming. I thought of my father's voice saying the high passes never forget trespassers. Something hard pressed against my ribs, not wood, not bone. My fingers brushed it free, a small smooth stone marked with a shallow spiral. I didn't know it yet, but that carving would mean more than any compass. I held it, like proof the world still existed beyond that crushing silence. When the cold bit deep enough to make thought thin, I stopped fighting. That's when the wind changed. Not warmer, just restless. Snow shifted above. Light found a crack, and I pushed toward it. The surface came all at once. I spilled into air, gasping like a newborn dragged from the dark. My wagon was gone. One wheel jutted from the drift like a broken prayer. The mule's traces led downhill but ended in the blur of white. I crawled to what was left, a splintered axle, my satchel wedged under it, canvas frozen stiff. My sketchbook, crushed in the middle, bled charcoal along its edges, like it had tried to draw its own escape. I gathered what I could, a cracked tin of pigments, a stub of graphite, and the strange spiral stone. Then the wind shifted again, this time colder, carrying a distant thump. Something moving through the valley below. The sun, dim as a coin, was sliding behind the ridge. Not up here meant death, quick or slow. I tried shouting, but the air swallowed my voice. My ankle screamed from the fall. The snow crust cut like glass. I wrapped my shawl tighter and limped east, guessing by the slope, praying for trees or smoke. Each breath felt borrowed. Then, through the spindrift, I saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from a darker patch in the pines. I started toward it, half crawling. The slope tilted cruelly, and I fell more than I walked. My hands cracked open from the cold, and each pulse of pain was a promise that I wasn't gone yet. When the last of the daylight caught the smoke, it twisted into a shape almost human. I blinked, certain my eyes lied, but then I heard it, the low strike of an axe echoing against rock. Someone was alive out here. I stumbled forward until the ground vanished. A buried ravine took me whole. The last thing I saw before the snow closed again was that same spiral stone rolling from my fist, tracing its curve into the drift as if marking the place I'd fall. When I woke, light flickered through a split in the log wall. Smoke pressed low against the rafters. I thought I'd died and landed in the belly of a burning house until I felt the weight of a bearskin over me, and the pain in my ankle reminded me that death wouldn't bother with such slow mercy. The man stood near the hearth, sleeves rolled, melting snow from his boots with a stick. He didn't turn when I coughed, just said, without lifting his eyes, "You're safe enough here. Don't talk." His voice carried the rough patience of someone used to being disobeyed. I tried anyway. "My wagon." He looked over then. The glance alone stopped me. His face was bronzed by wind and years, and his hair tied back with rawhide. Around his neck hung a cord with small stones carved in shallow lines, spirals, arrows, something between language and prayer. He poured water from a kettle into a tin cup and handed it to me. His hands were nicked and burned, but careful, like a craftsman who knew the worth of quiet. I drank greedily until the heat reached my bones. "What place is this?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched to tend my ankle, wrapping it in cloth cut from an old shirt. I realized then how small the cabin was. One cot, a table, a stove, and tools hung like bones along the wall. No sound except the hiss of sap in the fire. When he spoke again, his tone softened. "You fell from the ridge. I found your track where the snow cracked open." "How long was I under?" He shrugged. "Long enough to forget words." I wanted to thank him, but something about his stillness made gratitude feel too loud. He moved around me, setting meat to dry on a rack, checking traps laid by the door. Every motion had its reason. Outside, the wind gnawed at the logs, but in here, the world was steady. I noticed a stone set on the mantel, just like the one I'd found. The spiral mark caught firelight and gleamed faintly red. He caught me staring. "That's yours?" he asked. "I found it in the drift, thought it was chance." "Not chance," he said, and took it gently from my palm. "Mountain leaves these when she takes someone. I keep 'em till spring melt." He set it beside the others, lined like names without words. A shiver ran through me, half fear, half awe. "Then you named the dead?" He nodded once. "So they don't stay lost." He turned away, busying himself with the fire, and I saw his shoulders tremble, just slightly, like a man carrying something he wouldn't set down even if it burned him. By nightfall, he'd said no more. I listened to him hum low as he sharpened a blade, the tune curling into the smoke like a memory of language. I should have slept, but curiosity kept me upright. Who builds a home this high just to guard strangers' ghosts? When he finally looked at me again, his eyes were sharp but not unkind. "You'll stay till you walk again. After that, your path's your own." He doused the lamp. In the dark, I heard him murmur a name I didn't recognize, and the stones on the shelf seemed to answer with a faint click, like bones settling. I thought of the spiral in the snow, of being lifted from silence. Maybe I'd stumbled not into rescue, but into ritual. I woke to the smell of pine smoke and boiled broth. My body had stopped shivering, but the ache lingered like a bruise too deep for skin. The man was gone. Through the split plank window, I saw him cutting ice from the creek, steady as the shadow of a tree. He worked without sound, and the silence between us grew thick enough to touch. When he came inside, he nodded once toward the bowl waiting on the table. "Eat, then rest." The broth scalded my tongue, but I didn't care. It tasted of salt, bark, and the faint sweetness of juniper. I wanted to thank him, but he had already taken his seat by the stove, carving at a small block of pine. Each curl of wood fell onto the floor in perfect rhythm with his breathing. "You never told me your name," I said. He didn't look up. "Names aren't for strangers." "Then what am I?" "Still alive," he said, and kept carving. His bluntness struck like a door closing, yet there was no cruelty in it, only wear. When the snow light dimmed, he lit a small bundle of sage and pressed its smoke toward the carved stones on the shelf. Each stone caught a flicker of flame and shadow. He murmured words so quiet they might have been meant for someone else entirely. I asked softly, "Is that your prayer?" He shook his head. "Not mine. Theirs." I didn't press further.
Something about the way he touched the stones, reverent but tired, told me these were the names of those who hadn't survived. That night I tried to draw him while he worked, but my hand trembled too much. The charcoal caught more of the smoke than his face. When I held it up, embarrassed, he surprised me by taking the paper gently. "Your hand remembers," he said. "That's good. Memory's what keeps people whole." "You speak like you've lost too many." He paused. "Too many for talk." After that, we learned a rhythm of silence. I'd hum when the wind grew mean, and he'd let it pass without rebuke. By the third morning, I could stand with his help. I noticed then that his hands always stayed clear of mine unless necessary, as if touch itself carried a promise he wasn't ready to make. When I tried stepping outside, the cold slapped me clean across the face. Still, the world looked different. The snow drifts glowing blue under the sun, the line of smoke rising from our chimney like a claim against emptiness. Inside, I found a new stone drying by the fire, a pale one, freshly carved with a single spiral. "Who's that for?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "For the one the mountain gave back." The meaning hit slow. My pulse stuttered. He'd carved it for me. I wanted to tell him he didn't owe me that honor, but the words tangled. He placed the stone among the others, then turned to me with a look that said, "Enough." That night he burned another sprig. I watched the smoke twist between us, thinking maybe silence could be its own language. But I knew it couldn't last forever. Beneath his quiet, something waited, something that would need words eventually.
The first warning came from the mule, its cry splitting the night like torn cloth. By the time I reached the door, he already had his rifle in hand, face half shadowed by the flame he'd snatched from the stove. "Stay inside," he said, but I'd learned by then that silence in the mountains was only safe until it wasn't. Through the window slit, I saw 'em, 3 shapes circling the corral, gray fur silvered by the moon. Wolves, lean from winter. The largest had one torn ear, a ghost of hunger in its eyes. He stepped out barefoot into the snow, torch blazing in one hand. Each breath steamed in the dark. He shouted once, a sound more growl than word, and the nearest wolf flinched, but hunger makes fools of all creatures. They came anyway. I grabbed his knife from the wall, heart hammering. When the torch swung wide, sparks flew like shooting stars, and for one awful moment I thought the fire would die. A wolf lunged from the blind side. I screamed his name, though I still didn't know it. He met the beast midair. The torch cracked its skull, but the second hit him low. They went down together, rolling in snow. I stumbled forward, slashing wild, until his hand shot out, catching my wrist. He hissed, "Hold steady." The wolf snapped inches from my knee. I bet his wrist hard enough to taste iron, just to stop my own shaking. That broke the panic between us. He pushed up, drove the torch down, and the smell of burnt fur filled the air. The rest scattered into the trees. When quiet returned, we were both trembling. Blood seeped through the wrap on his arm, mine too. The snow steamed around us. Inside, he sat on the floor, breathing hard while I tore strips from a spare shirt. His eyes followed my hands, unreadable. When he wrapped the cloth around his arm, our fingers brushed. He didn't pull away. "You should have stayed inside," he said finally. "You should have asked for help." He looked up at that. For the first time I saw something like humor tug at his mouth. Small, broken, but real. We cleaned the wound in silence. The torch smoke still clung to our clothes. When he reached to tie the final knot around my palm, he paused. "You fight like someone who's run before," he murmured. "I have," I said. "And you?" He shook his head. "No, I stayed. Too long." The fire between us crackled, the air thick with unspoken things. Outside, a wolf howled far off, the kind of sound that could break or bind hearts. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling his lids low. He said, "If they come again, we don't run, not from hunger, not from men." Something in his tone made my pulse jump. Men. He knew danger wasn't finished with us. I wanted to ask who he meant, but he'd already gone still, eyes closed, hand resting on his rifle. So I sat close enough to feel the heat of him and listened to the wind scrape across the roof. Two hearts learning the rhythm of the same fear. By the third thaw, the snow around the cabin sank low enough to show stumps and muddy grass. Steam rose from the eaves each morning, and our breath no longer ghosted in the air. The mountain still held its silence, but we'd learned to live inside it. He'd begun teaching me small things, how to reset the traps without losing fingers, how to tell rabbit prints from fox. My hand was steadier now, my limp nearly gone. When I worked, I hummed the way I used to while sketching in towns. At first he frowned, but one day he said quietly, "Keep that. It keeps the air warm." We fell into a rhythm, his hands on snares, mine on chores. I cleaned the pans, sketched the ridge line, swept the floor, and made poor jokes that sometimes drew the hint of a smile. He spoke more now, though every word still felt measured by cost. At dusk he showed me how he carved the stones, each spiral marking not death, but return. When the mountain takes someone, their breath goes into the wind. I carve the wind back into shape so it doesn't forget. I watched his knife trace that delicate circle and thought how art and grief were the same motion, both trying to give loss a body. I began sketching beside him, copying the curve of the spiral into charcoal lines. The shapes calmed us, like shared prayer. One afternoon, while fetching kindling, I found a small river flower trapped under the ice near the creek. Its stem was green, fragile, defiant. I brought it inside. He stared at it as if I'd carried in a ghost. Then, wordless, he took a sliver of pine and began carving again. By nightfall, the carving was done. A stone etched with that same water flower, petals open, stem curling like hope. He placed it near the fire to dry. "For what you kept alive," he said simply. That night I told him a piece of my story, about the city I'd left, the betrayal that sent me east with nothing but sketches of a life that never truly belonged to me. He listened without interruption, eyes on the fire, jaw set as if swallowing his own confession. When I finished, he said, "You didn't run, you carried something." I muttered, "Regret." He shook his head. "Memory." The way he said it made me feel seen in a way that frightened me. The days grew softer. We learned each other's small habits. He liked his coffee burnt. I liked mine cold. He never left the door unbarred. I always forgot. We argued once over how to salt meat, then laughed before finishing the fight.
I started sketching him carefully, in stolen glances, his profile caught by firelight, the scar near his temple. When he caught me one evening, he didn't scold. He just said, "If you're gonna draw me, draw the mountain too. We're the same weather." We both looked away after that, pretending the remark meant less than it did. The next morning, a woodpecker's knocking echoed through the pines, and he paused mid-step, gaze fixed on the horizon. He said, "Something's moving down valley. Too early for traders." The gentleness we'd built flickered. Spring had returned, but so had the world beyond us.
He came at midday, when the thaw made the air smell like wet stone and sap. I was hanging linen outside when the sound of hooves carried up the ridge, uneven, impatient. The man beside me stopped chopping wood. His axe froze mid-swing. A rider crested the trail, lean and smiling, coat too clean for mountain work. He waved his hat like he owned the wind. "Well now," he called, "I'd heard there was company up here. Didn't believe it till I saw the smoke." The hunter said nothing. He just rested the axe across his shoulder. I could see his eyes darken, same way they had the night of the wolves. The stranger dismounted, dusted his gloves, and looked straight at me. "Ma'am," he said with a tip of his brim, "you match the sketch in my ledger near perfect. Artist from back east, ain't ya? Been missing some months." My stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean." He grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Reward says otherwise. $100 for safe return. And I do mean safe." He let that last word linger too long. Before I could answer, the hunter stepped between us. "There's no one for you here." "Easy, friend," the rider said, lifting his palms. "No trouble meant, just a job." He tapped the side of his coat pocket where a folded paper showed its corner. The edge bore my initials. "Who sent you?" I asked. He smiled again. "Depends who's paying. Paper says family, but truth is, money's money." The hunter's jaw tightened. He moved closer, the axe still balanced. "You got what you came for. Leave the mountain the way you found it." The stranger laughed. "Can't do that till I know which story sells better, the runaway painter or the man hiding her." Something in his tone turned my stomach to ice. He wasn't here for me, not really. He wanted whatever land or secret kept this cabin standing in the high silence. I took a step forward. "You said there was a ledger." He nodded, reaching for it. The hunter's hand shot out, faster than thought. The axe handle cracked across the man's wrist, sending the ledger tumbling into the mud. The horse spooked. The rider cursed, clutching his hand. "Go. Don't come back." The stranger bent, picked up the soggy book, and met my eyes. "You think he's your savior, miss? He's got his own bounty. Different page, same ink." Then he swung into his saddle and rode off, laughter trailing behind him like smoke. I turned to the man who'd saved me twice now. "Is it true?" He didn't answer, just stared at the ridge where the rider vanished. Men like him don't come alone. He went inside, grabbed his rifle, and started checking the sights. I followed, voice trembling. "What did he mean?" He paused. "Means trouble's looking for more than money. Means they'll come again, and they'll come hungry." Outside, wind clawed through the thawing trees. Inside, the air felt thin, ready to break. I looked at the shelf of stones, at my carved flower among them. Suddenly, they felt less like memorials and more like warnings. The snow melt turned to mud, the creek loud with new water. Each morning the hunter checked his traps. Each night he came back tighter in the shoulders. "Tracks in the South Timber," he said once. "Too many for elk." We both knew what that meant. By the third dawn, we heard the riders. Their echoes spilled through the pines. Laughter, metal, men unafraid of being heard. I peered through the window slit. 4 of 'em, maybe 5, led by the same gold-toothed stranger. His hand was bandaged now, his pride not at all. They won't talk first. They'll take. We moved fast. He pulled the table against the window, shoved kindling into the stove till the metal glowed red. I gathered every pot and bucket to carry water. His eyes met mine once, steady. "If they breach the wall, you go low. Crawl to the cellar. Don't argue." "I'm not hiding," I said. He almost smiled. "Didn't think you would." The first shot came from the trees, splintering the door frame. Wood chips bit my cheek. He fired back, one clean crack that dropped a shadow behind a stump. The air filled with gunpowder and pine sap. We took turns at the slits. Smoke drifted low, stinging the lungs. Outside, the riders shouted, promising safe passage, gold, anything to make us open that door. He didn't answer. Silence was his shield, always. Then the roof caught. A lantern tossed, or luck's last cruelty. Flames licked the rafters. He tore a blanket from the cot, soaked it in water, and threw it over the beam. I climbed on the chair to beat the sparks with my sketchbook, pages flying like startled birds. Bullets tore through the wall. One clipped his shoulder. He fell against me, teeth gritted. I pressed the wound, feeling the hot pulse under my palm. "You can't bleed now. Not yet," I whispered. He nodded, jaw hard. "Hand me the hammer." We built our last line fast. Stacked wood, iron pans, tools, anything with weight. He crouched beside me, breath short. "When they rush, aim for the legs. Don't waste rounds." The riders came as the sun broke over the ridge, their shadows long and sharp. The first hit the door with his boot. The second came through the window, rifle first. I swung the hammer, felt it connect. The man crumpled, half in, half out. He fired again and again until the echoes blurred. When silence finally returned, only the wind answered. Smoke curled up from the field, thin as thread. He leaned against the wall, eyes closing, blood dark on his sleeve. "They won't try again," he said, voice rough. I wanted to believe him, but in the smoke I saw more than victory. I saw the cost. I took his hand, slick with blood and ash. I said, "Then we live, whatever that costs." He squeezed back once, faint but sure. "We live till spring." Outside, the snow gave way to mud, the color of iron. The mountain had its offering again. When the first green blades showed through the melt, the world seemed ashamed of all it had taken. The cabin leaned, smoke-scorched and patched with raw boards. His shoulder mended slow, my hand slower, but we were still here. Down in the valley, the creek roared like it had been holding its breath all winter. We walked there once each morning, silent except for boots and wet moss. He carried his rifle out of habit. I carried my sketchbook, though half its pages were gone. The gang never came back. Their tracks had washed out, their fire pits drowned. Still, I felt eyes in every stand of pine. He said, "The mountain remembers longer than men." One evening I found him outside carving again. The stone in his lap was different, smooth and sun-warmed. The carving showed a bloom, wide open, the same flower I'd brought from under the ice. He set it on a flat rock overlooking the valley. "For the ones who made it," he said. "Mountain doesn't know what to do with the living." I laughed softly. "Then we'll have to teach her." We stood together, looking out at the ridge. Steam lifted from the ground like ghosts learning to be clouds again. I realized then that the silence between us had changed. It wasn't a wall anymore, just space wide enough to hold two hearts. That night, I told him about the East, the galleries, the promises, the betrayal that sent me running. He listened without blinking. When I said I might go back to start again, he only nodded. "You could. World's big enough." "Would you come with me?" I asked. He took his time answering. "I belong to this height, but you could build here if you meant to stay." We fell quiet. The fire popped. Spring rain tapped on the roof. I thought about trains, cities, everything I'd once called future. Then I looked at his hands, scarred, steady, the same hands that had dragged me from death and taught me how to breathe slow Ben. I said, "I came here running from shame. Seems a waste to leave now that I've found peace." He gave a small nod. "Then plant something. Let it grow taller than regret." The next morning we climbed the ridge together. The air was sharp with thaw and pine. He carried a carving knife, I carried a sprig of that river flower. We set them both on the stone, his carving and my offering, side by side. "Does this mean we stay?" I asked. He looked at the valley, then at me. "Means we begin." We stood there as the sun broke through, hands clasped over the warm rock. The flower trembled in the right, and for the first time since the avalanche, I felt the mountain breathe easy. The silence that once buried me now held me up.